All right, and we are back here on the GSMC football podcast. And for the third part of the show, we are going to talk about the stat leaders in the NFL after the regular season. We'll go through them. I'll give you my thoughts on them. So, again, this is something that I did throughout the year, but there were times, well, I kind of stopped just because, I don't know, I just didn't really talk about it. But now it's the end of the regular season. So, I figured to revisit them. So, the passing yards. So, you got Tua Tagovailoa, who finished at the top, 4,624 passing yards. You had Jared Goff at 2 with 45.75. Dak Prescott at 45.16. Josh Allen at 43.06. And Brock Purdy at 42.80. And all those teams are in the playoffs. Now, some of these teams will be going home. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Actually, there's a scenario where all of these teams could end up advancing to the next week. Well, the 49ers have a bye. But Buffalo, well, I don't want to get into who I'm going to predict on, who I think is going to win, because I want to save that for tomorrow, even though I've kind of, alluded to who I'm going to pick in some of these games. But yeah, all these teams are in the playoffs. When you're looking at these quarterbacks. And then you go to passer rating, except the Vikings. Kirk Cousins ended up still being third in passer rating, even though he missed, a big chunk of the second half of the year. But Brock Purdy, he ended up being the leader in passer rating at 113. Dak Prescott had a 105.9 passer rating. Kirk Cousins 103.8. Lamar Jackson 102.7. And which is a popular radio station here on the East Coast where I am. And then Tua Tagovailoa, 101.1. So, yeah. Again, all those teams, except for the Vikings, all of those teams, all of those quarterbacks are on playoff teams. And it really just makes you wonder what kind of season Kirk Cousins would have finished, like what his final stats would have been if he didn't get hurt. And I'll be honest, I think if he doesn't get hurt, Vikings are probably playing this week. But, injuries really just ruined this season. But it's a part of the game. But I don't know. But again, that was a non-contact injury too. It's just really injuries really stink. That's just the bottom line. So then we go to rushing yards. Christian McCaffrey obviously was the leading rusher. He finished with 1,459 rushing yards. Derrick Henry led the AFC in rushing yards. He had 1,167 rushing yards. Kyron Williams had 1,144. James Cook had 1,122. And DeAndre Swift had 1,049. Yeah, and listen, Derrick Henry, at times there were some rough games for Derrick Henry. But listen, he's still able to get, over 1,000 yards rushing, and we'll see where he ends up next year. I know that there was some talk of maybe some speculation that I saw at least on social media, but it's speculation that maybe Dallas is a possibility. I really hope not. As a Giant fan, if he went to Dallas, because you got to remember, now I think it has more to do with the injury than anything else, but they had a nice combination with Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. Like Zeke would get those short yardage gains that they needed, be the goal line back, a good change of pace. And then you had Pollard last year, who was one of the most explosive running backs, in the NFL, and then he got hurt in the playoff game against the 49ers. So I honestly think next year Pollard's going to be better. I think he'll be better, but I think they also need to get. Now they have running backs there, Deuce Vaughn, and Dowdle as well. But I don't know. I feel like, listen, you get Derrick Henry in there. I don't think that's a bad move. But maybe they don't want to do that. And I'm not saying he's going to be the lead back, but at least, be the change of pace back, to kind of fill in that Zeke role. But I don't know. I don't know if Dallas would do that, but we'll see. I hope not. So Tyreek Hill ended up finishing with 1,799 receiving yards, so he doesn't get to 2,000. If he doesn't get hurt, probably ends up maybe getting it, but yeah, he fell a little bit short. And then you had CeeDee Lamb, who had 1,749. I mean, what a great season that CeeDee Lamb put together. He was a monster this year. And, now we'll see what he does in the playoffs. We'll see what Tyreek Hill could do against his former team this weekend. We'll see what CeeDee Lamb does against the Packers. You got Amon-Ra St. Brown. He finished with 15 receiving yards. One of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL. We'll see what he does against the Rams. Puka Nacua finishing with 1,486 receiving yards. Again, I mean, came out of nowhere. I honestly I'd never heard of him until this year. He was one of the best waiver wire pickups in fantasy. And he just, I mean, listen, Cooper Kupp missed those first few games of the season, and he just even when Kupp came back, he was still a monster. And we'll see what he does in his playoff debut against the Lions. And then you got A.J. Brown at 1,456. So those are your top 5 in receiving yards. Again, A.J. Brown is going to play on Monday. It seems like he's going to play, but it looked like, when he got hurt against the Giants that it wasn't good. But it looks like he will be playing. Then we go to scoring for kickers. And Brandon Aubrey, the Dallas kicker, I mean, what a season he's had. He's been unbelievable for them. So he has 157 points. Then you got Justin Tucker at 147, Jason Myers 138, Harrison Butker 137. Kind of needed a few more points there to, get me into my fantasy championship. But let's not talk about that, even though I just brought it up. And then you got Cairo Santos of the Bears at 136. So those are your kicking stats. Then your sack leaders. So I almost said J.J. Watt. T.J. Watt, 19 sacks. Unfortunately, will not be playing this weekend in Buffalo, which I talked about yesterday, which just really hurts the Steelers. But yeah, another great season for him. Josh Allen, the Jaguars, 17.5 sacks. Trey Hendrickson, 17.5 sacks. Khalil Mack, 17 sacks. And Danielle Hunter of the Vikings with 16.5. So those are your sack leaders there, the top 5. Then interceptions, you got Deron Bland, the Cowboys broke the record for pick sixes in a single season. Then you also have Geno Stone of the Ravens in second. Now I just clicked out of it. I clicked out of what I was looking at. He had 7. Jesse Bates, a good pickup for the Falcons, 6 interceptions. Rasul Douglas, he finished with 5 interceptions, and Travarius Ward of the 49ers with 5. And then tackles, Bobby Wagner, 183 tackles for the Seahawks. Zaire Franklin, 179. Alex Singleton of the Broncos. Aluakun of the Jaguars, 173 tackles. And then Al Shire of the Titans with 163. So those are your tackle leaders. And then actually we'll go to team leaders as well. So the Vikings, in total, between their quarterbacks, they led the league in passing yards with 4,700. Then you got the Dolphins with Tua, 4,698. Cowboys, 4,660. Dolphins, Lions, 4,606. Texans, 4,578. Rushing yards per game, the Ravens led the way with 156.5 rushing yards per game. The Bears had 141.1. 49ers had 140.5. Cardinals, 139.1. And the Lions, 135.9. Receiving yards, the Vikings, 276.5 receiving yards per game. Dolphins, 276.4. Cowboys 274.1, Lions 270.9, Texans 269.3. And then in scoring, Cowboys led the way 29.9, Dolphins 29.2, 49ers 28.9, Ravens 28.4, and the Lions 27.1. All playoff teams. No surprise there. Again, all playoff teams here. Total offense. Dolphins 401.3 yards per game. Niners 398.4. Lions 394.8. Bills 374.5. And the Cowboys 371.6. And then sacks, the Ravens finished with 60 sacks in total on the season. The Chiefs 57, Dolphins 56, Bills 54, Colts 51. Except for the Colts. The Colts were borderline playoff team, but pretty much everybody else playoff teams. And then interceptions, the Bears actually are tied with the Niners for 22 interceptions in total. Then you got the Ravens, the Bills, and the Browns all tied with 18 interceptions. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. And then there's just like kick return and punt return stats, but I don't think we really need to go into that. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to the stat leaders. Like I said, most of these categories, when it comes to scoring and sacks, it's a lot of this playoff teams. And that's what we will get into when we come back from our final break of the show, is talking about, some of these, most of the matchups. There's at least like a revenge game aspect in each of them, except for, I guess, like one of them. I'm pretty sure, for the most part, I think every game there's like at least some kind of revenge. But like more specifically, like we'll get into it, but you have like a former coach or a former player going up against their former team. But there's also matchups that happened in the regular season this year. And we'll be seeing them again in the postseason. So that's what we're going to get into when we come back. And and also just want to remind you guys that tomorrow we will have the baseball show. So we'll have a doubleheader. And then obviously the football show will be after that. And then that'll be it for the week. These weeks, like I always say, they fly by. They are just, it's crazy. But So when we come back from our final break of the show, we're gonna get into revenge games for this weekend. So it's pretty much, like I said, pretty much every matchup, there is some kind of aspect of that. So, we'll get into that. I'm not going to, make any picks or anything because we're going to save that for tomorrow. I'll have my bracket, how I think the playoffs will shape out. So you don't want to miss that because then you could criticize it and say, yeah, this is not going to happen. But, so that'll be for tomorrow. But at least for today, we're just going to talk about the games, the revenge game aspect of the playoff games for this weekend. So stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.